Well, staying with schools, the new head of Ofsted has warned the behaviour of pupils in certain areas is now so bad that teachers are having to lock themselves in classrooms at lunchtime for their own safety. Speaking for the first time since taking on the role, Sir Martyn Oliver said one school was so broken that staff are being blocked from certain areas by kids who told them this is a no-go zone. His comments follow a prevention of future deaths report from the coroner after head teacher Ruth Perry took her own life last year after being told her school's rating was being downgraded. Ofsted inspections resume on Monday with new safeguarding guidelines in place, including a mental health training and staff hotline. Now, again, I mean, there is this sort of tendency with schools is we do get worried about them because we can't always see inside them. And we hear one story, no-go areas. I don't know what image you've got in your head, but I've sort of some sort of Mad Max dystopia. You know, something that doesn't mean there's a lot of schools, there are a lot of teachers and a lot of pupils. There's a lot happening every single day. And of course, we all had those uncles that would tell us in the 70s, or we held the science teacher out of the window by his feet. But that was fun because it was the 70s. But anything that happens now is obviously terrifying. But what I would say that there is a culture of these sort of like the cult of the individual and entitlement that has pervaded schools. I mean, there were certain schools I was in and around where I heard of kids sitting in on interviews for teachers, which I always felt was just breaching that line. So there is a culture where, you know, being told off or being told what to do is a different sell than it used to be. And, you know, certainly when you get to like 15 or 16, some of these kids are big. So in terms of the atmosphere...
They are giant.
They are massive. And in terms of the atmosphere in schools, it's not hard to see how that climate could have moved on. In terms of the Ofsted thing, I think it's really difficult, isn't it? Because there obviously is this tragic case. But, you know, with this finding, we want to know what's happening in schools. We want to have autonomous bodies that are in there to report it. So I'm glad to hear that they've resumed.
But I think it's the one word result that I think that is so destructive, isn't it? It's the one word. So, for example, you go into a school and, you know, that the Ofsted inspectors should be looking around and going, right, there are 73 languages being spoken here, therefore they are doing a really seriously good job at, you know, battling against all these other things. You know, surely it deserves more than just a one-word result.
You're
good,
absolutely right. Ofsted
bad.
is not fit for purpose, but it's such a blunt instrument. I'm looking at primary schools at the moment, and honestly, the difference between outstanding, which puts you up there, and good, can be just like one extra box ticking. So many teachers will tell you that it doesn't have any nuance. Ofsted is not fit for purpose. What Ofsted does is cause massive stress and pressure on staff, you know, preparing for a report. It's very random. They swoop down. It's very random. The primary school I was looking at the other day hadn't been inspected since 2012, just because it hadn't... There's no kind of rhyme or reason.
When you say they swoop down, though, isn't there something to be said for it just being a spur of the moment thing?
Because some schools
a
lot of stress.
It does cause stress, but also the stress of knowing that
preparing.
When I was at phase 1 NQT training, my God, I mean, these people, like, it was several weeks of their lives, but what they were able to do was paper over some of the cracks. I think, actually, this move towards flash inspections, which gets a broad brushstroke. But I absolutely agree. One word, you're distilling it down to too little.
I think we have to let teachers be teachers. My school, we had Mr. Ewing and Mr. Behan. They set the culture of the school. If you're a bad kid, they're the ones who would be disciplining you, and they'd made sure that all the boys and girls were falling in line. I think there's not enough parents parenting properly. I think there's a massive lack of father figures as well, because that also has people who have a lack of a father figure, and that doesn't mean you have to have a dad at home, but you have to have an uncle or it's your teacher or whatever. Those kids who don't have that, according to the statistics, they underperform at school. They're more likely to end up being separated at school. So I think we've got to let teachers teach and discipline.
And also, the other problem, of course, is that we've got the remnants of the COVID years coming on here as well, which is that we've got more absenteeism. We've got more parents who think it's acceptable to have children off, either to go on holiday or to actually just take off, even though they're not even sick, just because of the fact that people have got kind of used to it.
Well, do you know what else, Penny? When I was just reminded, when I was used to do parents' evenings and stuff, when my mum used to come up to school, she'd sit there and go, right, what has he done? And then suddenly I had these parents that were acting like football agents, where they would sit there and sort of like, yeah, but my client would push back on that. So, yeah, within a generation...
We would quake at home on parents' evening, we would sit at home, fearful of our parents coming home.
Yeah, they would see it as they were a team, not against you, but in concert with trying to make you achieve your best.
Yeah, you say we'd be quite fearful. I was terribly fearful. My dad used to read out my comments to the teachers. I'd written, I don't like them. No, she doesn't like you. Excellent. Thanks, Dad.